Have you ever wondered why it is harder for women in the workplace to become a CEO? A recent McKinsey and Company report surveyed 329 companies employing more than 13 women in the workplace. Yet in 2019, women only made 21% of executives. You might also be wondering what this has to do with diversity, equity, and inclusion. This story illustrates what happens behind the scenes in the workplace with women of color or different backgrounds and how they navigate race and gender. My name is Rochelle Carrier, and I'm a DEI consultant. And for a living, I help thought provoking leaders implement DEI plans in their workspace. And when you tune in, you will have a better insight of our shared experiences, and it will also allow room for self reflection. Join us as we discuss racism, sexism, DEI, and microaggressions that women of color incorporate. Today, I would like to introduce to you Senyabu Sene. She's a CPA by training. She has worked in the financial accounting field, but realized something was missing. In 2019, she launched an advising firm for African students wishing to come to study in Canada. Having once been in the shoes of these young students, Senyabu arrived in Canada from Senegal 17 years ago to study. Cora International Education Services offer guidance that she didn't have in advice on an orientation and integration to the Canadian community for potential international students. She is a member of the executive committee of Association of Sambe Gint. Did I pronounce that correctly?
That was perfect. Yes.
This association works towards the economic development of a village in Senegal called Sambe, where her father was born. She contributed in 2021 to the building of the first school in the village of Sambe. She's looking forward to other projects involving women, such as building a birth center. Currently, Senyabu is a corporate advisor for international talent recruitment for Quebec International. Her mandate is to help curb, that's a huge word, curb the labor shortage that Quebec is facing. She has lived most of her life in America, and having spent her most former years in Africa, she considers herself a world citizen, navigating and contributing to the two continents that made who she is today. Senyabu, thank you so much for coming and welcome.
Thank you, Rachel. Beautiful introduction. Thank you for having me.
Oh, you're welcome. Next on our panel is Stacy Gordon. Leading at the intersection of diversity, inclusion, and workplace culture in her role as executive advisor and diversity strategist, Stacy Gordon coaches and counsels executive leaders on DEI strategies for business while offering a no-nonsense approach to education for the broader employee and population. Stacy's book, Unbias, addresses unconscious bias at work, debuted at #1 on Amazon's hot new release list, and is also available at Barnes & Noble and wherever the books are sold. Stacy is the #1 course creator across the LinkedIn Learning platform and has surpassed more than 1 million unique learners overall. Her unconscious bias course has been translated into at least 4 languages. She has worked with people managers and executive leaders from companies such as American Express, ADP, Kia Motors, Hewlett Packard, Walmart, GE, and many others to deliver special sessions that support the D&I efforts. She earned her MBA from Pepperdine University Business School and her certification in SHRM Inclusive Workplace Culture credential. Thank you so much, Stacy, for coming here today. Oh, you're on mute.
I was saying thank you for the invitation.
You're so welcome. Thank you so much for coming. And Brandy P. Johnson. After Hurricane Katrina, Brandy Johnson is a New Orleans native who relocated to Houston, Texas to build a better life for her family. While in Houston, she worked as a litigation paralegal in global insurance and oil and gas. She has recently moved to St. Paul, Minnesota to attend law school at Mitchell Hamline School of Law. As a first generation, as we talked about backstage, first generation non traditional law student. Oh, I like that. Non traditional. Representing matters greatly to Brandy. It is essential to her that she properly honors the sacrifices made by her ancestors and takes advantage of the privileges she has been afforded. She plans to continue positively representing her community and school as she embarks upon a legal career that includes civil rights work. Brandy is a member of the Bridge Builders ESQ, National Membership Program for Aspiring Black Lawyers, Mitchell Hamline's Black Law Student Association, Mitchell Hamline Student Bar Association, and Phi Alpha Data Law Fraternity's mock trial competition team. She was recently awarded the Winthrop and is it Weinstein
Yes.
2022 Entergy Fellowship. Additionally, she accepted a law clerk position with the Hennepin County Attorney's Office. Thank you so much, Brandy, for coming here today.
Thank you so much for the invitation.
So let's start with our thought-provoking questions. What is it like being the only one in the room? Brandy, let's start with you. What's it like being the only one in the room?
Actually, when you sent the question, I pondered it over and I realized that I've always been the only one in the room. I've had very minimal interaction where I wasn't the only one. So it's a little difficult to compare. However, when I am or have been the only one in the room, it's important to be my authentic self, but also assimilate. My mom has taught me since very, very little. When I told her that I wanted to be a corporate lawyer, she taught me to assimilate. And so I do it well, uh, but also while being unapologetically me. Um, which means that when things are said and things are done or inappropriate, I have to call it. I have to call it out because most times I'm the only person who is available to do such work.
Right. Do you think you're advocating for yourself?
Absolutely. One of the things I've recognized is I have always been an advocate and I always will be an advocate because just simply existing requires advocacy work.
Right. And Sinyabu, have you all always been the only one in the room? I mean, I lived in Montreal myself for 35 years. So I can actually say I've always been the only one in the room where whether I was hired as a token or not, probably a token. But when I think back, I think like what Brandy was saying, I always had to advocate for myself. Is that how you feel?
Yes, definitely. I feel like I've always been the only one in the room here in Montreal. It has been hard in the beginning, coming from Africa, coming very at a young age, like 19. Um, I felt being singled out, being different in my initial years here, probably because I was young too. But now in the corporate world, I've learned to be very authentic to my African self and be very proud of my roots and also use this position to educate about the idea they have about Africa, the stereotypes they have about Black women, Muslim women. And so I feel like I do have a baggage and I also have a responsibility. And the fact that I'm the only one also in the room gives me a stage um, in order to change the narrative, which is a big responsibility too. but a responsibility that I'm really proud to have and carry.
Right. Stacy, I see you shaking your head. How is it for you being the only one in the room? And I definitely want to talk about your book as well, because it's going to touch on unconscious biases and how you walk into your space.
Yeah, it's definitely, I think to Brandy's point, when you've always been the only one in the room, you don't notice it. I mean, you're aware, right? But you're used to it, and that's just life. You deal with it. And it wasn't really until a few years ago, I had a really jarring experience where I went to Maryland, and I realized I had never been to Prince George County as an adult. And so I had a great time. I was there for a conference. It was actually a diversity conference. And I felt really relaxed while I was there. And, I had a really good time. I went to DC, did a few things, come back home. And I was like, when I came back home, I thought, why do I feel so restless and at unease? And I just couldn't figure out what it was. And it went on for a few days, maybe even a couple of weeks. And I kept thinking, like, what is wrong? And then it finally hit me that, wow, while I was in Maryland, I was around Black people all the time. I was walking into stores where I was being served by Black people. I was talking to Black people. I would see Black people on the street, and it was just normal. And so I'd walk into a store. There wasn't this sense of, can I help you? You might be about to shoplift something, right? Like there just wasn't any of that. And so when I came back home to my mostly white neighborhood, it was the difference. You don't even really notice it, but my skin felt it, like my soul felt it. And it really hit me. I was like, oh my goodness, this sucks, right? This is what we are conditioned to just live with day in and day out, and don't realize what it's like until that pressure and that unease is taken away.
Right. So it's funny you said that. I went to Haiti in 1991. My parents are Haitian. And then recently I was in Tortola and St. Thomas. We went on a cruise. I went to Tortola and St. Thomas and Dominican Republic. And that ease that you're talking about is a belonging.
Mhm.
This feels so comfortable to be among my people, right? And to be the majority. And I think, right? So,
Well, and it's not even about being the majority. It's about
No?
being automatically accepted, right?
Right.
It is that belonging, that there's not a sense of you don't belong. There's an automatic sense of this is where I'm supposed to be. It makes sense that I'm here, right?
And
Right.
it's also acceptance as well. I feel that when I go home to New Orleans, being around not just people of color, but high achieving people of color. When I'm around, I'm a part of a Mardi Gras crew back home. And so when I go into that space and there are doctors and judges and accountants and all these very, very high achievers who I'm sure in their own spaces are the only one. But when we all come together and it's just automatic, you're automatically accepted. And it doesn't matter whether your hair is straight or kinky or curly. It doesn't matter. It's like an entire suitcase that you don't have to pack.
Mhm.
You can simply show up as your authentic self, and it's acceptable, and it's honored, and you're almost ostracized for not being your authentic self. You're encouraged to be naturally, and we say naturally New Orleans, but it's naturally who you are, who you were born and made to be. And you don't realize until you go back into your corporate space that there's a suitcase sitting over there that you have to unpack, and all these layers that you have to put on top of it. And it's exhausting, and it's heavy.
Mhm.
Yes. Yeah. Heavy is definitely the word. And like I said, I really think it is just that idea that you don't realize how much you're conditioned to do it until you're removed from the situation. And it's frustrating, and there's not a lot you can do about it, but it really tugs at you when you see it played out. Like I have 3 daughters, and it was probably about a year ago. I was listening, I overheard a conversation. So I have a 10-year, well, at the time they were 10, I think 17 and 18, or maybe 18 and 19, I don't know. But the 2 older daughters were giving my younger daughter advice as to what to tell people when they want to touch her hair. And I just thought, damn, right? Like, still, like, what? And there's nothing you can do about it, right? There's, so I didn't bother to step in and say anything. I was like, her sisters got it. They seem to be giving her some advice, and I just walked away. But you just walk away shaking your head, thinking, damn, we still have to deal with this, right?
We do. We have to deal with it, and I think in corporate we have to deal with it a little bit more, and our work is often judged. Do any of you feel that your work is often judged?
Based on hair, or based on, I mean,
Yeah, it's
There's so many different layers.
layers,
Yeah.
right? There's physical experience, physical appearance, and there's also a work experience. But to touch back on the topic, it's when we're in that corporate workspace, we tend to work a lot harder than most because we know the expectations are higher. And there's always a sense of being passed up for promotion. Wouldn't you agree?
well, I think we're also conditioned, right? Again, it's just part of, it's not something we choose to do. It's something you have to do. It's bred into you to do.
Right.
That's also what I wonder, to what extent are we expected to be, let's say, to get into the mold? Aren't these probably conditioning, as you said, but also expectations that we put on ourselves? What's the truth, or let's say, what would be the balance between it? And for me, I try to focus on the things that I can control and on the thoughts that could help me advance in my career. So it does come from time to time where I feel like I need to work 3 times harder. But I would just say to myself, maybe I need to work 3 times harder because I'm lacking maybe this skill, or I need to, let's say, maybe integrate the team in a different way, as you were saying, Brandy, about assimilating. That's also important because what I've seen from the immigrant community is that we go into a workplace and we're trying to look for people that look like us, and we stay in a corner. We go on lunch, we go with those people. We don't try to integrate. So I try really to look at the things that I can do better while staying my authentic self.
Right. Well, and I wonder how much of that, though, is, so we talk about unconscious bias, like some of that is unconsciously, we take cues, right, from our world. And when we're young, our world is our parents, right? And so if our parents, very rightly so, have behaved in certain ways because that has kept them safe, it has kept them healthy, it has kept them employed. And so those are cues, though, that we learn. And then I realize, and I don't even know what those things are, honestly, that I don't know how many of you also have children, but really watching my kids has made me realize things that I'm doing that I don't realize I'm doing. So I still to this day don't even know exactly what it is that I was doing in this instance. But again, my youngest daughter, she must have been like 3 or something at the time, and we were at the park and she wanted to go play. These kids were like playing in water or doing something. I don't remember exactly what. And you're at that age where you kind of want the kid to go away from you a little bit, right? But they know mom's here and they can come back. You want them to have some independence. So she said, "Can I go over there?" And I said, "Yeah, you can." So she toddles over, she goes over there, and I watch her, right? And she's watching all of the kids play, and she stops before this sort of area. She doesn't go in, right? She just stops there. And then she comes back to me and she just sits down and starts playing at my feet. So I was like, well, what are you doing? I thought you wanted to play with the other kids. And she goes, well, there's a sign. I think that sign says I'm not supposed to go in there. And I was like, you can't read. What makes you think the sign is telling you you can't do something that you clearly can see that other children are doing? And in that moment, I was like, oh my God, what thing is going on right now?
What was the sign?
I don't even remember. It had nothing to do with anything. It was just a sign in the park, right? It had nothing to do. It was just the fact that she saw a sign and she made this inference that the sign was telling her that she couldn't do the thing that the other kids were doing. And I don't know why. And I was like, oh my God, what am I teaching my children? Like, what subconsciously is happening? And ever since then, I've really tried to be very open and like, you can do what everybody else can do, right? You have, this is open to you, you know? But that was such a stark, like, parenting moment where I was like, oh my God, what is happening? And it might have nothing to do with anything really, but it sticks with me. And I always think about that. And it just makes me think about, in general, we are conditioned to do certain things. And we talk about how we pass down trauma, right? To our children. And we really do. And we don't realize that we're doing it. And it's not just our kids, but to anyone, right? That we are touching, if we're teaching, if we are around other people, we teach people how to behave based upon how we behave.
Right. So they're mimicking us.
Yeah, I think for me, it's a combination of all three: conditioning, assimilation, and then finding that balance. I am a part of a community where there's less than 5% of African Americans in the entire community globally. So there aren't very many people of color that are lawyers. And there's an even smaller percentage that are female, and that's of any race. And so when I told my mom at 7 that I wanted to be a lawyer, she lost it. And she went out to a garage sale and she bought these really huge law books. And back then, well, I'm saying back then, but there aren't any pictures. It's just words. And so she bought them to me. And I, at 7, I'm looking at her like, what do you want me to do with this? And he had already launched a campaign that if you're going to be a lawyer, this is what you have to do. You have to read. You have to make the best grades. You have to, there's this laundry list of things that I would have to do to be a lawyer, to be successful, to assimilate into the culture, because there were even less females back then. And so in her mind, she's like, I think this is ludicrous, but if we're going to get close, I've got to prepare her. And so she put a lot of extra expectations on top of the norm. I was probably the only kid in high school who was grounded for getting an A in the class, but I got a B on the final, which meant that I didn't properly apply myself. And so I needed to, sit back and reflect on my actions or the lack thereof. And so that conditioning, though, there were just certain things. Like I remember in 9th grade, I absolutely had to take the typing class because lawyers typed and you have to be the best typist. And so, the teacher had her expectations, but my mom had those extra expectations. Like the teacher wants 60 words per minute, you need to do 80. And so she's always put this extra layer. And once I finally got into corporate America, I realized I needed those extra layers because I had to justify why I was there. I had to justify why I got that that COE position. I had to justify my just very presence. And so I then added extra layers of what was required to be there. And I couldn't take advantage of only going have lunch with the people who looked like me, because the people who looked like me weren't in the positions of where I wanted to be. And so I had to figure out how to find out how to get there. And that meant I had to assimilate. And so there's just so many layers with that. The clothing that you wear, the speech. Like, I couldn't use slang when I was a little girl. I was grounded. So many people say, "Oh my gosh, you're from New Orleans. You don't have the you don't sound like you're from New Orleans." Well, because I couldn't say ain't and zank, because my mother was like, "Absolutely not. The word isn't." It is.
You
It is
sound like you got grounded a lot.
but it helped me because it allowed me to go into certain rooms, honestly. And I remember as a paralegal,
Because of the lack of female leadership. It goes back
yeah,
to what we're talking about. The lack of female leadership is really important to explore because, you know, those are the experiences that Black women want. And then what happens before, which is with you, what happened before was all those expectations on those different layers for you to be able to be accepted in the space, right?
right.
So that there are more women of color like you, so that my daughter, who's 7, could say, Brandy did it, and she's my color. That means I can do it too.
But I
Yes.
think too,
Representation, yeah.
like this is a space where we have to start looking at, like, and this is why I got into DEI work, because
Right.
we put the pressure on ourselves, and this is, to me, the tide is turning, where we finally is saying enough, stop. I'm not putting extra pressure on me. I'm putting the pressure on you. I'm putting the pressure on you, employer, on you, CEO, because you need to accept me for who I am. You need to stop having me put the pressure on me, and we need to start turning things around and into the other direction. And I think that's a lot of the frustration that's happening in the workplace right now is exactly that, because people are pushing back and people are saying enough, and they're not used to that. So there's this struggle in the workplace that is happening right now that, to me, is frankly is a good thing. It's a hard thing that everyone is having to go through. But I think if anyone takes anything away from what I say today, it's that we need to push, right? We need to push back. We need to push forward. We need to push up. But what we can't do is continue with the status quo, because the status quo is killing us.
Yeah,
Yeah, physically.
I do believe that we need to take our place. And instead of just waiting for it to be handed to us, and that means really being bold and assuming who we are, and obviously having the skills and the experience required. And for me, when I worked in the accounting field, I believe that depending on the sector, there are more, let's say, biases and also microaggressions, racism, etc., depending on the type of work that you do. These last 2 years, I've questioned, all of uh, my decisions when it comes to my education, my career, also the education I received from my parents, etc. And all of these layers, I was just trying to find who I really was. And now I'm doing a career where my Blackness, the fact that I'm African, the fact that I traveled and I represent diversity is a benefit. It is something that will help advance the organization that I am working for. So I no longer feel, even if I'm the only one in the room, I know that my voice is as important or even more important than the voice of the other people who are more homogeneous, who are from here. So I think it depends also, definitely the sector of the law is probably very masculine, very Caucasian as well. So it's definitely a different dynamic. Accounting was the same thing.
But I think, to the topic, having more women in the space
Mm-hmm.
makes a huge difference. And I feel that, and forgive me if I get just a little emotional, but I feel that way because just recently, the fellowship that I've been awarded, it was because women believed in me. A professor who I've not even taken her class yet, believed in me, and someone who had never met me physically, she didn't know that I was a woman of color. She saw my credentials. It was really, flooring for me that I was actually judged by the content of my character and my skill set, and not you know, because I was a Black woman. But that was women who made those choices. Um, I've worked for mostly men,
Right.
Caucasian men, and I have been stifled in various instances by working for Caucasian men. But for the first
What do
time,
you mean by stifled?
well, there's been several positions that I was qualified for, but was blocked, or um, when the negotiation of, well, this would probably work better for you over here, and I said no, I still want to do this, actively blocked in my career. So this is refreshing and it's new, but again, it's women.
Right. But I think that other part of that is there's two things that happen. You know, we don't want to get into a space of saying, it's always, it's white men that are the problem, right? What we do want to understand though is that there is a intimidation factor. And I jokingly said to a group of mostly white women, I had a talk that I did for, it was 800 women in New York City a few weeks ago. And interestingly, we were talking about the idea that for women who want to help other women, I was like, look around the room, right? We have 800 women, it's mostly white women, and it was tech. So what we also see is there is this space where we really just have to get out of this idea that well, I should say the scarcity mindset. I think there is fear, and there is this idea that if we start opening things up more, like if I give Brandy this position, then it means John can't be hired. And it's like, no, it doesn't actually necessarily mean that, right? But that's that there's this us versus them that's happening. And jokingly, I said, look, if you really wanted to have your workplaces work, you would hire all Black women, because guess what? We work the hardest, right? So if you really wanted to get a bang for your buck, you would be hiring Black women. But I think there's just this place where we have to really start reevaluating. And like you said, Brandy, looking at credentials and looking at people for what they can bring to the table instead of who they are. And that is the really big shift that needs to happen. And that's a mindset shift. It's not nothing to do with workplace policy or any of that. It's mindset.
It will
I
take
agree.
generations. Yeah.
I agree. I actually told a classmate of mine, who I'm actually really close friends with. I told him we were just speaking generally, and he said, "Oh my God, you're like everywhere. You do everything." And I said, "Yeah." I said, "So remember when you get that big job in that big firm, and you guys are at the water cooler, and they're saying, 'Man, there's this lawyer, and man, she just really, we can't get away from her. Let's go to the golf course.'" I said, "I need you to step up and say, 'Listen, dude, she's probably at the golf course. Like, she knows what she's doing. Just give her the account. Like, she's gonna do the job better than probably most.'"
Yeah.
And he just laughed at me and he said, "If I ever get the opportunity, I'll do it. But chances are I'll probably be asking you." But just kind of setting that expectation that I'm gonna be there, and I'm bringing other women of color, and not just women of color, but credentialed individuals with me, and look at the credentials. Don't look at whether, it's a white guy or a white woman, whomever. Look at the credentials.
Yeah.
Right. Do you feel that you might have more responsibilities in the workplace than your colleagues?
Well, so I'll say, I think what would happen is you would get more menial responsibilities than your colleagues, right? Where we end up being the one, and this is for women in general, right? We're the ones that ends up planning the parties and birthdays and the lunches and, doing the cleanup at the end and all the other little things that don't put money in the pockets of, of the company. But, you know, on another note, some of that is work that is important, because I remember working for a company where we used to have lunches and birthdays and all this stuff, and it was great. And then we would all plan. And then, you know, it was like, oh, we need to tighten our wallets, and we stopped doing it. And you know what happened? The team wasn't as cohesive. People weren't as happy. People started leaving. So people like to say like, oh, the birthday lunches, they're not important. Yeah, they are. They are important because they are a retention tool. They are a way for people to get to know each other. They are part of your culture. And once you stop recognizing the importance of that and what someone is bringing to the table, when you realize that somebody who's really good at connecting people and bringing people together, and that person leaves, and all of a sudden your team fractures, right? You didn't want to value the contribution this person was bringing to the table, but now they're gone, and you can't get that back.
And to that point, I think we put a lot of that on ourselves as well. I think that it is work that needs to be done, but I think we are typically first to sign up for it. My dean has really been an integral part in my development, in that I notoriously backpack a situation where there are other people who are just as competent, but if I was the first to sign up for it, you know, someone else will assume, oh, well, she's already got it. So I think sometimes we sign ourselves up for those extra tasks, and then we do them so well that they just inherently become ours.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I would say the same. In my experience, it's mostly a conditioning. In the workplace, when I go with what I believe to be enough in terms of work standard, it is enough. But when I push for more because I feel like I am the only one, because of my own insecurity, it starts affecting my mental health. And I'm at a point where I want to be able also to enjoy my work as other people. Why should I be the Black person who has to stay until 8 p.m. when everybody's going? Why do I have to do triple the work? So I'm also working on my mindset when it comes to that.
And I think that's exactly what Stacy was saying. You know, it's really, well, there's two things. There's the mindset in keeping you mentally healthy, and then there's also the mindset of this is the space where I belong. Correct me if I'm wrong, Stacy. Is that what you meant? You know, the mindset in being that when we walk into a space, we know we deserve to be in that space, and we're in that space for a reason. And it's because I'm credentialed that I'm in this space. And then there's also something that's very interesting, because I talk about that also on the show with a few doctors that have been on the show, about our mental health. You know, our mental being, knowing when enough is enough. This is when I'm going to step back so I can regroup and recuperate so that I can be a better version of myself.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think there's that, but I think there's the third part, right, which is for the other people, which I get we don't have control over, but again, it's part of my job to to work with individuals to change that mindset. And so the point there is, you can have the mindset that I belong, but if there isn't inclusion happening, right, if there isn't acceptance happening on the other end, then you're just kind of being gaslit, right, in the workplace. And so, and that is mentally challenging. So I can have all the ego and bravado and everything else and confidence that I belong and know that. But if every time, you know, to Brandy's point, I put myself forward for something and it's like, no, not this. How about that? No, we're not going to put you there. Let's put you over here in the corner. No, we're not going to put you with that client. Let's take you and put you over here with that client, right? Like, that is going to grate on you every single time. So what I'm saying is, if for people who are listening, in a place, and let me be very specific when I say white people, people in power, whatever color you happen to be, race, and also women. I mean, I remember being in a role very similar with Brandy. I actually went to law school. I'm a law school dropout, so proud law school dropout. I decided that was not for me. But I was working in the legal department of a large entertainment company. And because I was working on getting my MBA, I thought, okay, I have some legal background. I got the MBA background. And there was this great business opportunity, business position that they created. And I said I was interested in the role. And I got ushered into the head of the department's office and ushered right back out in less than 5 minutes. And it was a white woman who basically was like, you have small children at home. This is probably not for you. Let me, kind of like walking me out of her office as she was talking to me. It's like, oh, thank you for letting me know that you don't value my contribution to this company. And in that exact moment, I was like, time for me to go. And I was out a couple months later.
Right. Because you were able to spot exactly what was happening. And that would have been, if you would have worked there, that would have been a very toxic environment.
Yeah, I mean, well, she was toxic anyway, but
Right.
that's a story for another time.
But I also think what I've started doing recently is making sure that the organization that I'm going into has the same values as I do. So during the interview, I'm not the only one getting interviewed. I'm also interviewing them and making sure values don't really have color. There's no race linked to that. So I do try to make sure with my questions that I'm going into the right organization. And now I'm taking also the 3-month probation as a test. Are all the things that you showed me during the interview, are those things true? Do you value my contribution? So it's also a different way of doing things. Again, we have a place to take. We have our say in things. So we can choose to.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And I would always tell people that I used to do career coaching, and mainly because being in this space, so I used to recruit, and I would recruit individuals, and then I realized that the individuals that I was recruiting were struggling in the workplaces. So then I went to coaching because I thought, well, I need to help prepare people for these positions. And then I realized, no, it's not about preparing them for the position. It's about preparing the company for the people, which is what I do now. But in that transition and realizing what I would advise individuals is exactly that, is that you have to stop falling into jobs. Stop applying for jobs. Just because a company put out a job opening on their website doesn't mean you have to apply to it, right? You need to be very clear about what kind of company you want to work for and then go apply to that company, regardless of whether they have an open position or not.
Yeah.
You let them know, I and you, we have the same values. I want to work here. This is what I bring to the table, and I want to work here because. And you give them that because there's always openings that will come up. And so when something does open, the first thing, to kind of Brandy's point, they're going to think of you. They're going to be like, wait, I got this letter from somebody that said they wanted to work here, and someone just gave me a resignation notice. Let me see if this person's a fit, right? So you're first in the door, but you're also curating where you want to work. I feel like every time you apply to a job opening, you're basically just taking what's being given.
Mm-hmm.
You don't want to settle. It's like, stop accepting the crumbs, the crap that people put out. You have to really curate your career and decide, where do I want to work, and then go after that.
Exactly.
Right. Women are also promoted to managers or senior positions at a far lower rate than men, making it nearly impossible for companies to lay a foundation for sustained progress at more senior levels. Was that ever your case?
Well, I will just say that I was a paralegal for 15 years. I'm now in law school. So in order to get to the next level, I decided I needed another degree.
Right.
Yeah, I totally hear that. I did the same thing, right? Was a paralegal for many years, went to law school, and then was like, it's like, hard turn.
You made a U-turn.
I did. I was like, no, this is not the life. But to your point, you do, right? Like literally this morning, I swear, I woke up and I was looking at, I was like, should I get a certification in diversity? And I was like,
Mm.
Stacey, what are you doing? You do not need yet another certification or degree or credential, right? Because I know what I'm doing. And if I have to get yet another set of letters after my name for you to understand that I am an expert in my field, then you are not my client. We do not need to work together. And I
Mhm.
had to just like, Stacy, walk away. What are you thinking about right now? You no more, no more. Right. So we're always in that place because it's never, like, hey, Randy, I'd like to promote you to this role, right? We don't just get stuff offered to us. We have to scratch and claw and create and do all of these things. And it's frustrating as hell.
I think to both of your points, though, we have to do, I'm not sure if that's mental health or self reflection, but we have to do the work in recognizing who we are
Mhm.
authentically. And not just from a characteristic perspective, but from a skill set as well. When you are actively interviewing a company for a position, or rather, just to uh, potentially get something in the future, and you recognize your value and the worth that you bring to that company, that interview looks a lot differently. And you also can better gauge what is required of you. For instance, you can sit back and say, Brandy, you really kind of need those extra letters behind your name. Or, no, I'm an expert in this particular field. And, it makes sense for me to get this next degree to go to the next level. But I think that important piece has to happen. And that was what kind of turned on its heels for me when I evaluated as a paralegal that I wasn't expert in that position, but if I wanted to go to the next level, I had to get those extra sets of letters behind my name. But also, even in that process, recognizing what I'm bringing to the table in that process. And so not allowing you to say, hey, maybe you should be over there, or maybe you want to, but saying, no, this is who I am, and this is how I benefit this company. And if that company can't likewise benefit me, then I'm not interested. I'm not necessarily waiting for you to tell me that you don't want to offer me the position. I am now in a space where I can say, no, your work culture doesn't work well for me, so no thank you.
Right.
Yeah. I would also add to that, like for me, what really helped me was networking and finding allies. It could be a black woman, it could be a white male, but just reaching out to people for them to see my work. Because what happens most of the time is when they see Zainabu on a resume, oh, well, she's probably from somewhere else. But if you have someone inside an organization advocating for you, someone who looks like you, or someone who's just different but has given you the chance to present, what you could bring to the table, I believe that also helps.
Yeah. Having an advocate always helps.
But allies also, like it can be a white person. Yeah.
Advocates. And I think, what's important. We talked about this on a podcast early on at its inception. It was mentorship.
Hmm.
I think growing up, we do have we had the representation in our households. We were being represented at home, but there's also something that's, I think, crucial in trying to navigate race and gender and just becoming yourself, as you get older, and having an objective point of view and someone mentor you to be able to bring a different perspective on something that you wouldn't have seen before, I think is really important, and it plays a significant role in in helping us, again, navigate race and gender in the workplace and in society, because, you're faced with situations sometimes that you just don't know how to handle,
Mhm.
whether it's your first job, or I know, based on experiences, we learn from anything that that we generally experience. But at the same time, I think mentorship, you said allyship and mentorship is really important. And
Mhm.
you know I mean, I just got a big sister for my daughter from Big Brothers and Big Sister. She's the only daughter, she's the only girl. And I was able to benefit from a mentor at 49 years old last year that was able to create ideas that I would have never had if I didn't have that mentor. So I think it's important for us as women, as Black women,
Mhm.
as you know, people navigating, we're just navigating this new space of life.
Yeah.
Life has curveballs, there are obstacles. These are all things that we have to face. But I think a mentor is something that's really crucial for us to be able to hold our hand, and to
Mhm.
give us ideas and perspectives, to listen to us, to be able to take the next steps that we need.
Yeah. As a
I don't
matter
know.
of fact, I'm a big sister uh,
Oh,
for a young Caucasian 10-year-old girl. And in the beginning, I was like, should I mentor a Black girl for representation? But when it came to values and our interests, it mostly matched with that Caucasian girl. And I'm learning from her. She is learning from me as well. And to when it comes to mentorship, also coming here as an international student, I feel like I there were just so many things that I didn't understand about the system, the educational system, the work system, that I realized way afterwards. For example, having a network, having a mentor, having a plan after school. What am I going to do? Contacting the friends of your father, etc. Because many of them were placed because they know someone who knows someone. Obviously, they live here, they're born and raised. That I didn't have. So I had to do the extra work afterwards in order to have, the mentorship I needed and the allies, etc. And I'm trying also to be that for someone else.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. There aren't enough things I can say about my mentors, and I have many mentors of varying genders, varying races, and they all bring something different. They all teach me something different. I think the important uh, bridge across them all is they actually listen, and
Hmm.
not listen to hear the words, but they're listening with their heart and understanding the things that I'm bringing to them. And honestly, there are a few of my classmates that I could say are mentors. I'm in a very new space. I'm in a new state, and they also have very different views on a particular subject. Not wrong views, just very different views, and that's important. Especially for the type of work that I am going to do, I need to be able to understand different perspectives. And so, therefore, I have to surround myself with different perspectives
Mhm.
and be able to hear them as well.
Right.
And so, they're just I think mentorship should absolutely be like the number one goal.
Yeah.
I will say though, there's a huge emphasis on mentorship, but again, not enough on the next step, right? Which is sponsorship, especially, I think for the younger you are, I think, yes, the mentorship is needed. I think as adults in the workplace, we need to really be focusing more on the sponsorship aspect, because you can mentor and mentor and mentor, but then again, we're spinning our wheels, right? We're in this space where we know we have, uh, value. We know we have credentials, but we can't get to that next step because there's nobody in the room advocating to bring us in. And so that's that next space that I think really needs to be a little bit more focused. And the other thing I see too is sometimes mentorship comes in this form of, oh, this person needs mentorship because they don't know better, or they need and it comes in almost a sort of condescending kind of way, which I'm seeing as well. So I'm a little bit I won't say biased, but I'm always looking at like, okay, what kind of mentorship are you really doing? You know, like, what is this going to look like? What are we going to get at the end of it? So I think that is another thing that I do look at. And again, we're getting a lot of this sort of lower level thing happening, but I forget who said it earlier. It's the idea though that we're still not breaking above, right? And we need to break through in order for there to be more people up in the upper ranks who can then reach down. And then, yeah, sure, mentor all you want. But right now, I'm like, we need to be punching holes in that ceiling. We need to be. I mean, I'm very much. I'm realizing the more and more that I talk over these last few years that I am much more like, let's really move this forward. Let's revolutionize. Let's take action. I'm done with the stuff of the past because we've been doing it for 20, 30 years and we're still here, right? We're still having this conversation. And I don't want my kids having the same conversation 30 years from now, which means we have to do something different. The definition of crazy, right, is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different outcome. And we keep doing the same thing over and over and over again. Mentorship is great, but we've been doing mentorship for 20 years. What has it gotten us? So I'm like, yeah, and like, could we get to the and? Because there needs to be some additional process and work and I think that's why I'm talking so much about pushing and about, you know, being the grain of sand, right? We have got to stop worrying about being annoying or about being the angry Black woman in the workplace or any of those things, because at some point, like, we've got to push past, you know, that resistance. And I forget the exact, there's that thing, right, about change, right? You kind of start and then you hit resistance and you get pushed back down. You've got to break through that resistance. Right now, we are at that level of resistance. And if we allow it, we're going to get pushed back down again and start this process all over again. We cannot.
Right. You know, I think to go back on mentorship, I think what's important also is to, and again, it depends at what stage you are in your life. But as I'd have to say, in my experience, my mentor helped me build connections, and there was a lot of ideas based on where I was, because I was transitioning. I taught for 25 years and I retired in February of last year. I resigned, actually. I didn't retire, I resigned. And I didn't know my next steps, but I had ideas and I needed to bounce those ideas off of someone who was very objective, you know, and that person helped me understand who I had to contact and who I had to speak to, where I needed to go, and to build that network to be able to get to actually where I am today in creating this podcast. I don't think I would have ever created this podcast or written 2 books if it wasn't for the mentor.
Because, right. And I totally get that. And I'm not trying to, so here's my thing. I don't want to argue the point, right? But I'll say this. We throw a lot of things into the mentor bucket. And sometimes we need to really be very clear about what is that person doing for us. Maybe they're an advisor, right? Maybe they're actually giving advice. Maybe they're giving legal advice. Maybe they're giving networking advice. Like, there's just so many different things. And so I think the word mentor, we overuse it and we throw everything but the kitchen sink into this mentor bucket and then call it a mentor. And so then it's confusing for some people, because you might not need a mentor. You might need an advisor. You might not need a mentor. You might need a sponsor. You might not need a sponsor. You might need an ally, right? And being clear about what it is that you actually need. So I think it's not helpful necessarily for us. And I don't just mean us. I mean, in general, we use the word mentor and it's very, very broad. And it's not clear for people, because if you're in a point in your life, you might need a coach, right? You might need a career coach. You might need a business coach. You might need a life coach. You might need, like, there's a bunch of different people that we throw into the mentor bucket and slap that label on it. So again, I want to be clear for people, like start being curating your career and your life and figuring out what is it that you need and who is it that you're going for, and not necessarily using this catch-all phrase as what you might need, because you might end up getting something which isn't what you actually need to get you to that next level. And then you say, oh, this didn't work for me, but it didn't work because you didn't get the right tool that you actually needed in that. So I just want people to be really, really clear. Because like I said, we're in a point where we've got to take our lives and our careers by the, you know what, and and really, but you can't do that without clarity.
Yeah.
Right.
That's exactly it. And it's interesting you said that, because with that clarity, right after that came a clarity coach, and the clarity coach was able to actually help me. This is all personal information, but no longer personal information. But and to your point again, it's I completely understand and agree that we tend to put a lot on the mentorship, but the mentorship was able to open other doors and other aspects that I would have never seen before. I didn't know who a clarity coach was. I didn't realize that I can get a career coach or a business coach, or those are not things that I was exposed to because I was in the classroom for 25 years.
Yeah.
You know, I was having conversations with parents and principals and doing lesson plans. You know, so when you come out of that realm, and it's like being in an ocean. It's like, where do I swim? Who do I swim to? What do I do? You know, I'm taking this leap I just turned 50 in November, and I took this leap of faith at 49. I thought, I need help. Where are my resources? Who are they? Who can help me? Who could bridge those gaps for me? You know, who can finish that sentence and say, oh, Rochelle, maybe you need this. Oh, Rochelle, maybe you need that. And I think that's where it begins. We have to, like you said, now we're at a point where we need to take action. And I think those little actionable steps help people to get to where they need to be, so that they can bring their chair at the table and say, here I am.
Yep.
You see?
Yeah. And I think it goes back to the overall theme of the podcast, right? Women in, higher level positions. Many of us didn't grow up seeing that. And so I think that the mentorship does open the door to a lot of that information. And I think also it's important to recognize that there are different levels of mentorship. Similarly to what you just said about walking out and there's this ocean, right? There is a mentorship level that points you to those various directions. Like for me, Claire Huxtable was my mentor at 7. I said, I like what she's doing. I love the eloquence that she, exudes every day. But obviously, Claire couldn't get me, she was a fictional character, right? So my mom had to be that initial, mentor to connect me to the next resource that would get me to the next level. And so there are levels to this mentorship thing. And I totally agree with Stacy in that, don't stay there. Like you can't enter the mentorship pool and we're just going to swim here forever. Like there are levels to this, and we have to make the little micro, actionable steps to get to the next level.
Right. There's a lot of feedback here. Felicia says, in my experience as a single woman, I observe women who are conditioned to nurture and serve, mothers and wives, often volunteer to help and then are assigned to continue that work. And somebody else said something very interesting. She says, Salufa, thank you for joining in. She said, we definitely need more support and pressure in Europe in terms of mentoring young Black people, sponsoring and regarding WOC, women of color, in leadership positions. Many of these young people have never heard about what mentoring is.
Yeah. So to Brandy's point, right? Levels, right? We
Yeah.
start, and with knowing, like you said, you can't stay there. We've got to keep
breaking
forward.
those glass ceilings. I agree. This has been a very courageous conversation. Give yourself some grace. We must keep having these conversations about DEI. Where these dialogues will take us, We don't know. At least we are here to help and share. I want to thank you all for coming today and being on the show. I appreciate it tremendously. Brandy, I wish you the best of luck, and Stacy and Senyabu. It was an utmost pleasure.
Thank
Thank you.
you.
You.